Hi, welcome to the third meeting of the Vegan Studies Network Research Seminar Series. And thank you so much for joining us again, despite the time zone difficulty that we've had. I want to let you know that we are recording this talk, but not the Q&A. So you can feel free to ask your questions without fear of being recorded. And we will put the Carlos talk on YouTube, on the VSN YouTube channel. Those of you who have registered will receive the link, or you can just Google Vegan Studies Network YouTube and you will find us. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Carlo Alvaro, who is a vegan moral philosopher who conducts research on metaethics, animals, food, and environmental ethics. Carlo has been teaching philosophy at New York City College of Technology of the City University of New York since 2011. And he is the author of Raw Veganism, The Philosophy of the Human Diet, which was published with Routledge in 2020, and Ethical Veganism, Virtue Ethics, and the Great Soul, just published by Lexington Press. And his topics include virtue ethics, sentience, food, health, animals, and the environment. So, Carlo, you are very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvia, for asking me to participate here. I'm very happy to be here and to share my thoughts on veganism. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to read I have a script. I'm going to read a script. I don't have any PowerPoint or anything like that, but I'm going to try to make it fun, not boring. Okay. And let me start by saying, as you pointed out, I wrote 2 books on ethical veganism. And in my second book, The Raw Vegan Diet, The Raw Veganism, The Philosophy of the Human Diet, I elaborate my argument. So there would be I don't think there's enough time to get into the details of argumentation. It might get even boring for some people. So I will just say a few things about my overall argument. My ethical argument is based on the notion of virtue. So if you're familiar with virtue ethics, the idea is that we require certain virtues in order to flourish. Why do we want to flourish? Well, it's a very interesting question, but we flourish because we have a function, and we have to fulfill that function. So if virtue ethics is correct in maintaining that the point of morality is human flourishing, and therefore human beings have to fulfill their function by acting from the virtues, then such a conclusion has moral implications concerning what we eat, our food, our diets. And so following that argument, it leads you to, in my view, to the conclusion that consuming a raw vegan diet is an expression of virtue. And in my view, it's the most ethical expression of veganism. And also that consuming cooked food, the other conclusion is that consuming cooked food, preparing cooked food can be, doesn't have to be, but can be dependent on, so I have to qualify that, can be due to the lack of virtue. Specifically, the virtues that I discuss in my work are magnanimity, or greatness of soul, and especially temperance. The idea, I'm very keen on the idea of temperance, of how human beings are capable of exercising their free will and their discipline when it comes to things like food, for example. Now, why raw veganism? Let me explain why raw. every species has a species-specific diet. This would be substances that are non-toxic and conducive to flourishing of that particular species. Now, Homo sapiens is the only animal species whose members, by accident, by the way, perhaps due to scarcity, they cook their food. And also the only animals who suffer from obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and more. Now, naturally, an objection is that it is not the food, okay? It's not the kind of food, but the quantity. And if you think about it, the quantity of food that we eat is a result of economic growth, industrialization, a sedentary lifestyle, the abundance of processed foods, which is high calorie foods. However, I have 2 points to respond to that objection. First point is that it seems to me, and it would be hard to convince me otherwise, that it is virtually impossible for humans to overeat fruit and vegetables and become obese. And the second point is that cooked food is, in my view, inherently deleterious, because the very point, the very idea of cooking food is cooking substances to increase the caloric value of that food. Now, no other animals in nature benefit from cooked food. Why should we? I don't think we do. As primatologist Catherine Milton writes, I quote, "The widespread prevalence of diet-related health problems suggests that humans are not eating in a manner compatible with their biology." And other people, other biologists and scientists also agree that modern humans are not eating a diet on which the primate line has flourished for many tens of millions of years, a diet that produced them. And such a diet, in my view, is what I call ethical raw veganism, a diet of uncooked, unprocessed fruit and leafy greens. Now, I consider 3 points in support of ethical raw veganism. The first point is that fruit has had a significant role in the process of what is called human encephalization. The second point is that raw diets are beneficial to human health. They're conducive to flourishing. On the other hand, cooked diets are not. And the third point is that raw vegan are the environmentally friendliest diets. So let me start with the first point. Research used to suggest that cooking food contributed to the brain expansion or encephalization. A famous paper published in 1995 by Aiello and Wheeler proposed the so-called expensive tissue hypothesis, according to which early humans developed a large brain due to the consumption of, and I quote, the incorporation of increasingly greater amounts of animal products in their diet. Also in 2012, a group of scientists published an important paper on the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States. And they write, I quote, "The combination of newly freed time and a large number of brain neurons affordable on a cooked diet may thus have been a major positive driving force to the rapid increase in brain size in human evolution." However, more recent research contradicts the old research. Another group of scientists recently show that, contrary to the previous hypothesis, human encephalization, in fact, occurred independently of and prior to cooking food. I quote the authors. They say, the expansion of the brain volume in the hominin lineage is independent of evidence of fire control, and therefore thermal processing of food does not account for this phenomenon being encephalization. So they conclude that, I quote, early hominins are likely to have obtained enough energy to sustain a large brain on a raw food diet with 5 to 6 hours of foraging per day. Now, this is interesting. They say a raw food diet, but what they mean by raw food diet, it's interesting because they mean, and I quote, seeds and meat, which are more caloric foods than wild plants and fruits. Now, note something very interesting about this research. So the authors argue that cooking did not promote encephalization and foraging efficiency. And yet they stress the importance of consuming high caloric food, which includes, they argue, raw meat and seeds. Now, I have 3 observations about this. The first observation is that, well, aside from the fact that eating cadavers, eating corpses, even animals, might have caused sicknesses to early hominins. But that aside, prior to the development of reliable hunting skills and tools, early hominins would not have had access to considerable and reliable and constant, continuous amount of meat. The second observation is that hunting is very risky and it requires a considerable expenditure of calories. And the third observation, perhaps the most important one, is that the brain requires a significant amount of glucose that obviously meat cannot satisfy. Brain functions such as thinking, memory, learning, and so on depend on glucose levels. If the brain is not supplied with enough glucose, neurotransmitters are not produced and communication between neurons is impaired. In short, no glucose, no encephalization, and no improved skills. Now, if you're thinking that meat provides glucose, think about the fact that research shows that perhaps 50 to 60%, they say, of proteins goes through the process known as gluconeogenesis that happens in the liver. But this expert says virtually none of this glucose enters into the general circulation. In other words, what this means is that we need glucose, the brain needs glucose, meat is not enough to satisfy the brain hunger for glucose. Moreover, there's another thing that Aiello and Wheeler observed. They observed, and I quote, gut size is highly correlated with diet, and relative small guts, like human beings, are compatible only with high quality, easy to digest food. But raw meat cannot possibly be high quality and easy to digest food. And it is hard to chew. As Catherine Zink and Daniel Lieberman pointed out in a recent paper, the masticatory features of early humans were inadequate for chewing raw meat. In other words, our jaws, our masticatory features are too weak for masticating all that meat. I quote, "These derived masticatory features suggest that the genus Homo consumed foods that were easier to eat, requiring fewer and less forceful chews and reducing the need for high maximum bite force." So to sum up, encephalization occurred independently of and prior to cooking food. Second, humans obtained enough energy to sustain a large brain on a raw food diet. Okay. Raw flesh was difficult to masticate due to weak masticatory features, which, by the way, I can't resist to make an observation. Meat eaters often point out that human beings have canine teeth and we are designed to eat meat, whereas science essentially says, no, our masticatory features are too weak to be meat eaters. We're not meat eaters, but that's another story for another day. The next point is that meat is very hard to digest. It is dangerous to acquire, and raw meat lacks glucose. Now, how can raw meat be instrumental in human encephalization then? Now, Zink and Lieberman suggest something of this nature. I quote, by simply slicing meat, hominins would have improved their ability to chew meat. But still, I point out, prior to farming and the development of tools and hunting skills, as I said, once again, where in the world would human beings find all that meat? Now, consider that the USDA recommends for good health consuming no more than 4 ounces of meat per day. But 4 ounces is really small potato, no pun intended, for a forager. At least we're talking about a pound and a half of meat. But that's a lot of meat in the stomach. But even so, even if foragers ate a pound of meat or 2 pounds of meat per day, that only gives you between 1,000 and 1,500 calories a day. Again, not very much for a forager. And imagine, so the amount of meat that they had to eat to survive. I would guess that a forager would probably require 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day. I can't imagine 6,000 calories a day by slicing 10 pounds of meat every day. Where do you find that time? Where do you find that meat? And what does that mean, meat in the stomach? Especially considering the fact that biologists are telling us that our guts are compatible with highly digestible food and nutritious food. Now, furthermore, in 2017, a very, very important article was published by a group of researchers at NYU. The group of researchers was led by Alex DeCason. Now, they originally set out to test whether monogamous primates had bigger brains than promiscuous species. And they found, so by accident, they found that the one factor that predicts which species have larger brains is whether the species, the subjects, consumed primarily fruit. So in other words, fruit, it seems to follow, is optimal for certain primates. So I conclude from this that if raw fruit and vegetables are highly digestible, they have the characteristics, the right characteristics for human beings. It's not a surprise to me. They're glucose rich and so on, easy to digest, and contributed to human encephalization. In short, I think that raw veganism is what I call, in my book, I call the human diet. Now, the second point, raw diets are especially beneficial to human health, and cooked diets are not. Now, I think at this point, there's a significant amount of research according to which raw food is optimal. I'm just going to mention a few. There's one recent paper as recent as 2018, published in the Journal of Clinical Cardiology, showing that a raw diet can be used as an effective therapeutic approach in the treatment of hypercholesterolemia, okay, and cardiovascular disease, while simultaneously reducing overall medication usage. And another recent research shows that increased consumption of fruit and vegetables from less than 3, and we're talking about raw vegetables and fruit, okay? They have done this by isolating their subjects in a hospital and feeding them a raw food diet. So they found that it increases the, it reduces the risk of coronary heart disease. Again, I'm not surprised to hear the results of these studies. So the conclusion is that a raw vegan diet is conducive to good health and thus to flourishing. Consequently, the foregoing discussion offers significant evidence, I believe, that a raw diet can be regarded as a species specific. In the words of Donald Coffey, I quote, "We were not biologically selected by the evolution process to eat the way we do today. And the damage is manifested in the prostate and breast cancer. Indeed, all the present suggestion of the National Cancer Institute and the American Cancer Society as to how Americans might reduce their chances of getting prostate and breast cancer revolve around adapting dietary changes in our lifestyle back toward the early human diet and of more fruit, a variety of fresh vegetables and fiber, less burning, cooking, and processing, diminished intake of dairy products, red meat, and animal fats, of course. We all know that. Also, Dr. William Roberts aptly puts it, although most of us conduct our lives as omnivores, in that we eat flesh as well as vegetables and fruits, human beings have characteristics of herbivores, not carnivores. But I think that this can be applied to veganism. Listen what he says. He says, the appendages of carnivores are claws. Those of herbivores are hands or hooves. The teeth of carnivores are sharp. Those of herbivores are mainly flat for grinding. The intestinal tract of carnivores is short. That of herbivores is long. Body cooling of carnivores is done by panting. Herbivores by sweating. Carnivores drink fluids by lapping. Herbivores by sipping. Carnivore, now this is the most important thing to me. Carnivores produce their own vitamin C, whereas herbivores, like humans, obtain it from their diet. Point 2b, conversely, cooked diets lead to negative health issues. So let me mention a few of these problems. Cooking destroys or deactivates many important and healthful heat-sensitive enzymes. Vitamin C is one example. Vitamin C is completely destroyed by heat processing food. Cooking also deactivates and destroys water-soluble vitamins such as A, B, C. Phytonutrients are destroyed. These are plant nutrients that you can find only in plants by cooking food. Cooking causes the formation of acrylamides, by the way. This is a serious problem, acrylamides. Cooking denatures proteins and also generates pro-oxidants, carcinogens, teratogens, and lowers the nutritional value of food. Now, when we talk about, by the way, cooked food, essentially, when you think about it, vegans who have cooked diets typically, not always, of course, typically consume grains. And if we're talking about grains, grains are toxic and destroy nutrients. They contain anti-nutrients, lectins, phytates, and possibly the worst of all, which is gluten. Now, Dr. Keith Fine has done a tremendous research in this field and show that gluten, it's not the way we think. That we think typically that there are celiac, there's celiac disease, so there's manifest problems that people complain about, people who are sensitive to gluten. Dr. Fine showed that, in fact, all human beings are tolerate gluten, but gluten is deleterious, it's bad for our health. Even though the symptoms do not manifest overtly. Furthermore, grains and legumes, in addition to being unhealthful, have negative environmental impacts. According to the World Wildlife Foundation, the surging demand for soy and grains is causing deforestation, a great deal of greenhouse gas emissions, and a significant use of water and pesticides. Finally, in 1930, Dr. Paul Kuchikov discovered something revolutionary. He discovered that when we eat food, let me premise with this. The human body has a way of attacking threats in the body. And that is the leukocytes, or white blood cells. And so what happens is that when a person becomes ill, has an infection, for example, the body as a response naturally produces, multiplies white blood cells to attack and take care of the infection. And Dr. Kuchikov discovered that this phenomenon, which is known as digestive leukocytosis, happens when we eat cooked food. When we eat raw food, digestive leukocytosis doesn't occur, doesn't happen. So that leads to the conclusion that the way that the human body sees food, regards food as a threat. Okay, now the third and final point. Raw vegan diets are environmentally the friendliest diets. According to virtue ethics, my overall argument, as I said, is based on virtue ethics. It is consistent with virtue to promote those diets that produce the least negative externalities and encourage moderation. Raw veganism is a viable alternative to cooked veganism, and it is environmentally friendlier than cooked veganism, and it promotes moderation because it's not based on taste and self-indulgence. Therefore, the virtuous person endorses or should endorse and promote raw veganism. I want to cite the words of Marcus Aurelius. He describes the best approach to life by writing the following, I quote, "If you seek tranquility, do less. Most of what we do and say is not essential. If you can eliminate it, you'll have more time and more tranquility. Ask yourself every moment, is this necessary?" And in the same spirit, I would want to add to what Marcus Aurelius said, if you seek health, eat less, because most of the food that you eat is not essential. Cooked food, cooked vegan diets are consistent with a philosophy known as hedonism, in my view. Vegans are too concerned about food instead of moral character and animal welfare. They're too concerned about what they eat tonight for dinner and how good the food tastes. So cooked veganism encourages, in many cases, encourages people to overindulge in unhealthful substances. And think about it that, again, by nature, cooked food is rich in calories. So it's very easy to overeat, overindulge in food, and therefore overconsume calories. Cooking food can help, for example, if you are starving and nothing else is available. But otherwise, I think it's useless. Nowadays, most people have easy access to fruit and fresh fruit and vegetables. And moreover, in order to cook vegetables, you need water, cooking utensils, natural gas and natural resources, electricity. Raw veganism encourages simplicity and minimal environmental impacts because it recommends consuming substances that are human specific in their raw state. Raw veganism encourages to eliminate from our diets all those substances that are not essential and that involve practices of food preparation that are not essential. Now, just think about it. The benefit of eating fewer food items and fewer calories. Two such advantages that I can think of right off the bat are one is autophagy. Okay, autophagy is the body's way of cleaning our damaged cells, and the other one is again, this is a benefit of eating less, fewer calories, is adult neurogenesis, which is a principle that a phenomenon that happens as a result of fasting more often. So in other words, the new neurons, new brain cells are regenerated, are grown. Also think about using fewer, if any, kitchen appliances and tools. Fewer steps, fewer procedures, and less waste. Fewer food items means fewer packages. Conserving energy, gas and electricity. Less detergents, less water, less trash and garbage less plastic, etc. Can a cooked plant-based diet do the same job? Well, in my view, it cannot. In addition to being unhealthful, as I explained during my talk, first of all, so long as we continue to regard human food as substances that are cooked and highly processed, we may never shake off the idea of cooking, and especially of cooking animal flesh. Second, cooked veganism promotes self-indulgence and obsession about food. Cooked, even if vegan, diets promote the principle, we live to eat. On the other hand, ethical raw veganism promotes the virtuous principle, we eat to live. A virtuous approach, I would add, to food that embodies moderation and aims at our flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlo, for this very provocative talk. I feel like I've been exposed to myself as a vegan hedonist, which I didn't know. I'm going to stop the recording now.